And then you turn it to something like the particular position of black boys and men. And I think that you see that very, very strongly. And I'll give a specific example of that, where there is now a commission on the social status of black boys and men. It's passed with bipartisan legislation in 2016. It's a standing commission within the US Office of Civil Rights to look specifically at black boys and men. And it got through, but there was a lot of resistance from particularly from black women, black women, black women, black women, black women, black women, black women in the Democrat Congressional Caucus, because of a sense that why are we looking at boys and men? Something similar happened when Obama did My Brother's Keeper. Like, there's this constant sense of like, this is going to distract from the deeper issues faced by black women and girls. Again, zero sum. Again, it's like we can't do two things at once is the basic thought there. So that's an example of just how difficult this can get.
Yes. Welcome, guys and girls, whoever will be tuning in to this particular stream or broadcast. I am the Chaos Reign here. This is the Chaos Reign Show, as always. Make sure as you come in and listen to this particular stream, podcast, wherever, make sure you give this video a like or dislike, wherever you want to take it. And please make sure to subscribe to the Chaos Reign Show. The links to follow me are above. You can follow me on Twitter at Chaos Reign 7. You could add me as a friend on Facebook, Eric Reign on Facebook. You could join my Discord service as well. Also follow me on Rumble as well. And last but not least, become a member of the Chaos Reign Show. I surely appreciate it. And like always, I'll do this for the contributors. This one's for y'all.
But they be knocking, y'all. The sonic rings up out of it, and you.
I'd like to thank the Red Pill Sleeper Cell with the first donation of the stream. $4.99 super chat. Thank you. Salute to you. And hope many more and wonderful content coming your way, Red Sleeper Cell. I appreciate it. Now, why I am doing this particular broadcast is the question. Oh, and please, guys, share the stream if you can. And if y'all want to contribute, you could do either the super chat or the Cash App. As in the Cash App, scroll down this screen called I think it's $ Chaos 8 Reign. I remember the old man did a stream one time, and he said that the Mr. Charlie or Zaddy, or what they call it, the Caucasian, or what we want to call it, the white man, ice is always colder. I would have to go beyond and even go further than this colder. He's actually frozen, for lack of better words. Yeah, I see it, Lewis. Thanks, Lewis. He is frozen. And what I mean by frozen, I've been hearing about this thing about My Brother's Keeper for some time now. And I did not say I believe it or deny this was not going to be a reality. But when I sit there and now hear firsthand through, black women especially, they love Zaddy. Anything Zaddy said is gold for those that don't know. So what he puts out is not only he could tell lies, but also tell truths at the same time. If that really makes sense for those that listen to me. So it has actually been confirmed that these women did block a potential outcome that would help these young men, or black men, or older men, but just men in general, or boys usually at the age of, I think, maybe 10 and up, and we could say about 8 years old, but usually as a certain age, put a certain program in place that help them not only financial but help them enough so that there is some form of even playing field, so the possibility of upper mobility will be a little bit better. It's not gonna be perfect because at the end of the day, there's still a competition amongst men, and they're not gonna give you every leeway or every tool possible, but it would surely help in regards to sanctions and all the other things that barriers that put against black boys that will become the black men in the future. Hope y'all follow me. So now, if black women have done this, right? And I'm gonna play the stream itself. I'm not gonna play all of it. I'm gonna play just enough of it and hear the interview with Mr. I think his name is Reeves. That's the last name, I believe so, yeah. And they're gonna have a very good discussion about this and more. So now, let me see what's going on. I'm just checking, see if I have the thing pulled up. Okay, no further ado, we're gonna listen to this interview firsthand. Yeah, and I do got tape highlights from David Carroll as well. So yeah. So now I'm gonna run this interview itself, and this interview is, I think, now almost a year old now, and it did not get much attention that it should have, and it should have gotten more attention than this. But y'all know what it is, guys. When you're talking about black people, especially black men, and things that is cater need for the better outcomes for black men or young black boys that will become black men as a whole, for any parameters or barriers that's going to prevent that and find that, yes, the black woman, or what they like to call the black queen, especially in certain higher positions. And it's funny, these women are higher positions, particularly in the so-called Democrat side. And we are in an election year, unfortunately. How they want to potentially put a woman that is not really black in office, for lack of better words. Yeah. But they are already showing their hand that anything that will be beneficial, that will help the black boys that will be coming in tomorrow, or just different things that will help black men in general, they will be in the front line to prevent it, and they will be gladly do it with a smile in their face. And I think that some black men are very comfortable doing these type of weirdo things just to keep, you at a certain position, not only economically but all areas of fashions. Unfortunately. And I had to come to grips, say, it is what it is. So now, no further ado, let's run this videotape. Hope you guys enjoy. Fair use.
Richard Reeves.
So that's the guy's name. Oh, my fault. Sorry, guys. So this is the guy's Richard Reeves. That's the man that said that about the My Brother's Keeper. So let's listen into the interview between, I think it's, and this gentleman here, he actually has a book that's out now. And do I still have the book on file? Let me see if I can find it. I might have gotten rid of it. I did save it somewhere, but I'm gonna play it. If I find it, I'll tell you the name of the book, guys. Let's listen carefully. Fair use.
I met you a few months ago at a conference, and we had really great conversations about a lot of different topics. And you told me about this upcoming book you were writing, which is now out. And the book is about, you'll get to describe all of it, but it's about the problems facing boys and men in our society. So my first question is, how dare you? I mean, everyone knows that we live in a patriarchy. There is a pay gap to the favor of men. Roe versus Wade was just overturned. We're on the heels of the Me Too and the Time's Up movement. And you have the audacity to write a book about the unique problems facing men. So the question is, why do that? Why now? And what brings you to this topic personally?
I think in some way, the irony is that the very successes of the women's movement have allowed us to take more seriously some of the problems of boys and men. I don't think this is a book that one would have been writing 30, 40 years ago, when essentially the fight for gender equality was virtually synonymous with the fight for women and girls. It was very hard to find metrics where women and girls weren't very clearly behind boys and men. But the very success of that liberation movement has been such that there are now some inequalities that run the other way. And I'm sure we'll get into some of those in education and so on too. So I think in some ways it's a gift of the success of the women's movement is to look at equality more broadly and to recognize that there are not only many inequalities that still affect girls and women, you've just mentioned a couple that we can get into, but that there are also some that disproportionately affect boys and men, and that we should be able to think two thoughts at once. And we should be.
Now, before you continue, for those that's watching, and I hope you guys write notes, because I can't really name them off the top of my head personally. And if those in the chat room, y'all guys better help than anything else. If y'all guys could write in the chat, and super chat would be better, but either or, I'll look at it anyway. What you think are the major blockage of why the black woman, or that I call the black beep, are doing or hindering or blocking the progression of the black man or young boys that will become black men? Type in the chat room. I'm gonna probably pull up. All right, let's keep going.
You have to look in both directions. And so I think it's precisely because we've had so much progress that we can now responsibly address gender inequality in both directions.
So in what domains of society, if you can just give a short summary and then we'll go deeper into each one, in what domains of society are men struggling uniquely?
The three areas that I focus on primarily, and I should say, perhaps I didn't answer the second half of your question, that I've been interested in issues of inequality and gender for a long time, but it really is I've raised 3 boys to adulthood, but also my day job, just looking at some of the trends, and particularly for working class and black boys and men, the trends just became unignorable for me. And I really did feel that there was a gap here that needed to be filled in terms of an attempt to just call these problems as I saw them from, I hope, an authentically feminist perspective, with feminism defined as being about equality. And the 3 in particular areas that I focus on are in education, where there is a large and in many cases growing gender gap in education. So to sharpen the point, let's take 4-year college degrees. The gender gap in 4-year college degree attainment is wider today than it was in 1972.
Let's stop right there. Oh, where's myself? I'm sorry. I didn't know I had myself. All right, y'all guys see me. Let's stop right there. Now, y'all know me. Education today, as I see it fit, does not serve not any person here in America. And let me tell you why. Because the education you get today, it is inferior, no matter what economic or wherever degree you take. Because you get this degree, if you go through the 4 years, you will put yourself in debt, and you'll be a debtor slave to someone else's establishment, roughly corporations. I remember one time Edward did a stream, and he might not catch a stream because he might be, that there were 4 elements of any person if they're trying to attain some form of wealth. And this is what he got from Robert Kiyosaki. And I can't name him right off the head because I have somewhat of a revised version of that book, and I've never read it fully. But these are things that if you're a man, screw the woman, but if you're a man, these are things that you should look into, especially if you're trying to progress in this uncertain technological society, which is now run and drive by artificial intelligence and the high advance of technology, which really technology, as it states, man is at the point now he could be very much a non-necessity if you work for somebody else, you are non-necessity, because the people that establish these corporations 40 to 50 years in advance don't really require human labor for their necessities of building their wealth per se. The only time they require is they want your money. But other than that, if you have a skill, they might use it to a point. But really, truly, and I want y'all to really follow me. And we got to get out of spooktism. We got to talk logic here. Because we live in a capitalist society. The whole premise in this capitalistic / Eurocentric American society is to get your production for the cheapest rate out of the dollar. And as we know, the dollar as it stands is inflated. So what they're going to turn to is, now you hear this notion, downsizing, doing all these things. Why are they doing this? They're doing this because they're trying to save money, i.e., they want to keep all the money to themselves. They don't want to pay nobody. And this goes beyond than that other consecrate. You might know what I'm talking about. Thomas said they did not want to pay no one. No, the whole premise is not to pay you, period. They really want a utopia where they can get your productions for the cheapest rate, the most affordable rate possible, while keeping all the money and leaving you holding the bag. Now we're going to continue with this. And I'm going to read out comments now. One guy said, power. Okay. And that's only one guy, and I think someone wrote that. So let's keep going. Fair use. And like always, guys, you know the deal. You know the drill. I don't have to tell you how much about this.
My money. I told you. Where is my money? Benny, bring me everyone. I need my money. I need my money. What do you mean everyone? Everyone!
Make sure to support the channel. Let's keep going. Fair use.
When the Title IX legislation was passed to help girls and women, but it's the other way around. There's now a 15 percentage point gap in favor of women as opposed to a 13 percentage point gap in favor of men back then. And in basically every advanced economy and every level of education, you're seeing just a stark gender gap in education. In the workplace, the story is a little bit more complicated because, of course, it is still true, as you alluded to earlier, that on average, there's still a somewhat higher male wage than female one, although for all kinds of reasons we can get into, largely around parenting. But it's also true that most men in the US today earn less than most men did in 1979. So if American men were a country, they're poorer today than 40 years ago. That's a remarkable economic fact. And
Since 1970, what? We're more poor than, and you know why that is? Now, there's many reasons why this has happened. We all know the United States dollar has slowly gotten weaker. Some will say, and will even verify, we no longer on the gold standard. That might have some heavy to do with it, but there's more than that. How we look at how people function in society and how people move in commerce is totally different now than it was over 50 years ago. And let's keep it real. You could probably afford and buy a lot of things back in the 70s and part of early 80s for a fraction of a dollar. You can't do that today. You cannot do that today. And no president, unfortunately, has really fixed this. The only person that was close to really booming and getting the economy somewhat stable, and this might bother a lot of men, which I found out was only when Bill Clinton was in office. He was the only person that stabilized the economy of this country. And the last time I checked, I think he was a Democrat. Now, not saying all Democrats have this potential doing, because as you know, Democrats now as states, they're more focused on creating little frictions outside the country, creating confusion sexually and all this other stuff. And really truly, the whole premise is they're not really in the business of really keeping America stable, from what I'm seeing. Now, I could be wrong, but that's what I'm looking at it, outside looking at it. So let's let Richard Reeves keep talking. Fair use.
particularly for men at the bottom of the economic ladder, and for black men. We're seeing very slow economic progress, or indeed stagnating economic progress. And that's partly related to the collapse of traditionally male jobs in manufacturing and heavy industry, and a failure on our part to help men into the jobs of the future. And then the third area is the family, where I think the very success of the women's movement in achieving one of its central goals, which is greater economic independence for women, has really, I think, asked new questions about what it means to be a father. And I think to some extent we're seeing too many fathers being benched because they don't or can't fill the traditional male role of breadwinner, and that world is not coming back anytime soon, and nor do we want it to. But we haven't replaced that with what I want to see, which is a much more positive role for fathers as an independent social institution, independent of marriage. And so the result of those trends is to leave quite a lot of men somewhat dislocated, disoriented, and somewhat lost. And it's that group really that aroused my concern and compassion, honestly, as I was attempting to chart the course through the book.
All right, so we're going to hit all three of those topics and some others. Well, let's just go one at a time. Let's start with education. So 50 years ago, men were more likely to go to college. And, some decades before that, it was a very rare and daring thing to be a woman that goes to college and, quote unquote, competes with the boys.
Well, I go for it. Might have been rare, but here's the problem. That's a choice. And we all know when women think and want to operate like men, then thus forth they're going to go into environments where men compete. Now, most men nowadays, usually we hands-on, we do things. We don't do too much bookworm unless we reading some to better our thinking and intellect, or better just to have more grasp of what other people think, so we are able to articulate and maybe regurgitate other thoughts when you read these books. But overall, women back then, even now, the college thing is another avenue for them to compete, to be as like a man in a way, to be productive, work, make money, and be like, this is a representation where it said that I'm like you. I'm a man. I go to school. I got a good job. I should be able to get the picking of the litter of men because I function and move like a man. And we all know a lot of men have been telling a lot of ladies this for the last couple of years, that it does not work the same way as you. A man is supposed to be doing these things. You're supposed to just bring yourself, be feminine, all this, this garbage, and be, a reasonable helpmate to a man any chance you can get. But when you start thinking and operate like a man, that's when you have problems. And I think most women nowadays that go to school back then and now, they don't really conceptualize that. Now, usually if you're a woman and you're in school, and let's say you are thinking of wanting to settle down and get a mate, that will be the best time to do so right there if you choose to. But other than that, once you leave the institution, what we call college, it gets very fickle out there in them streets. Just saying. All right, let's keep going. Praise.
That world is in the rearview mirror, and we now face a world where men are less likely to graduate high school than women, less likely to complete college than women, to the point where colleges, in some cases, have to use a kind of affirmative action for men to get some kind of gender parity. I remember from going to Columbia, the ratio of men to women was definitely, there was more women than men. So what is behind this trend? What's going on here?
Well, you're right in the general description. So on campuses now, it's about 60-40 female, male students, and the gap has completely reversed. And it's worth saying, I think, at this point, that nobody expected that. I've talked to a lot of the folks who were writing about gender inequality in education in the 1970s. and really fighting to get Title IX through and do much more to get women and girls into education and through education. Nobody expected the overtaking. You can't find a single paper that said, well, wait, what if the line just keeps going? So it has been genuinely unexpected. And I still think everyone's coming to terms with that unexpected and significant overtaking. And you're right, more likely to graduate high school on time, more likely to go from high school to college, much more likely to go to college, much more likely to complete college on time, rather than drop out, etc. And the result of that is these big gender gaps. And you're also right, there is this interesting sidebar that the only institutions that can practice sex discrimination in admissions are private undergraduate colleges who got a carve out from the Title IX discrimination law. And the reason they got the carve out was to protect single sex colleges. If you made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of sex, then you were overnight going to abolish all the single sex colleges. And so there's this carve out. But now the carve out is being used for those private colleges to discriminate slightly in favor of men in an attempt to remain closer to 50-50. Meanwhile, the public colleges that can't discriminate, because they didn't get the carve out in Title IX, they're much more like 60-40 because they can't do this kind of stealth affirmative action thing. And what's interesting about that is less in some ways the affirmative action thing in these small colleges. It's more, what does it say? What does it say that some of these elite colleges especially are having to have a slightly lower bar for men than women in order to try and maintain something close to 50-50? What it says is that girls are outperforming boys very strongly throughout the education system, including up to the point of college admissions. And I think that's for the simple reason that the boys mature a bit later than girls, which is why I think we should give them, start them in school a year later, but maybe we'll get into some of those details.
Now, I'm not sure about starting school later, in my opinion, and the reason I had to pause right there. And I'm going to check how we doing on likes in a little bit, guys, because like anything, the better you get these boys under your control, the better. I'm not no proponent where, but off instead you start, what do you call it, kindergarten at 6th grade, I think 5th or 6th grade. You want to start them at what, 7, 8? We got to keep in mind that there's certain development where you have to go through stage from toddler to baby, toddler, teenager, and somewhat young adults. And this is just me, guys. You stunt a boy's growth when you start him when you start him late in the game. Instead of him going at 6th grade for pre-K or 5th grade, you want to start him later. No, you want to keep him at the same pace like everybody else. Matter of fact, I think you want better, because if you train the boys right, they could probably start a little earlier. Personally, I'm just saying, because there are some gifted men, young black men, young boys out there that could start those schools years a little early and finish early. Well, you see, we don't do studies on that because most of our children are being taught and being taught by somebody else. If you look at the ones that been homeschooled and got the education from the home alone with a respectful parent that takes the education seriously, young boys progress just further, maybe faster. Personally. The younger the mind is, and you try to feed it information and nurture it at a more adolescent stage, the better. You're not going to sit there and think cold-heartedly that if the boys start school later, that they're going to have an edge on these girls. No, they will not, because the school system, as we looked at and as we know, was designed to operate for females, not for all genders. Boys should not be sitting down all day in a chair. You're supposed to give them actual activity, and it should really hone in to how the world works. I remember there was some books I have, I think was it Amos Wilson. He talked about unlocking natural gift of the black child, and we're going to talk about our children. I can't speak for other children, and there are clues how you can get the best out of your children. especially the boys. I would highly advise people look into that particular book. But anyway, I'm not gonna rant more. Let me keep running this. I don't want to stay here all day with this stream. Various.
Yeah, let's get into that because, I mean, this is one of those truisms that I've heard people say my whole life. You know, girls mature faster than boys. I think, you know, in your book, you say there's some evidence that it's something like 2 or 3 years faster at some time in childhood. Is that was surprising to me?
Yeah, so it's not a truism; it's true.
Yeah.
So and I think that's an important distinction. That it's like, but it's interesting. Like, and I've shared this drafts of this book and this particular section on this big maturity gap. A lot of people, in fact, I want to say everyone goes, well, duh,
right?
Tell us something we don't know. But okay, we'll just pause there and then say, okay, if it's true that there's at least a year, and it depends on how you measure it, depends on which study you look at, but at least a year's gap. In some argue it's close to 2 years gap in the development of these crucial parts of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, which is sometimes called the CEO of the brain. It's the bit of the brain that makes you do your homework rather than go out to party. It's the bit of your brain that cares about your GPA. It's the bit of your brain that works on college application essays. It's the bit of the brain that can think to the future in terms of the decisions you're making now. And on average, and again, of course, the distributions overlap, there's a pretty big gender gap. And what that means is that a 15-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl, everything else equal, are not the same in terms of their development. But the education system really does reward how people do between the ages of 15 and 17, which is in some ways just when that gap is at its widest. And so there's this truth that girls mature earlier than boys, which everyone knows. And it's partly about the timing of puberty as well. But it's a truth that is entirely ignored when it comes to education policy. And I think now we see these growing gaps as a result of women's progress. I don't think we can ignore it any longer. I think if there's such an obvious developmental difference based on sex, we should take that into account, which is why I propose just starting boys in school a year later by making them a year older in the classroom than the girls they're with on average. That will make them developmentally a little bit closer. They'll be closer to their peers in terms of their development than just using chronological age to do it. But it requires, I think, to agree that there's a problem in the first place before we even get into policy proposals like that. But I was determined to have solutions and a positive agenda here rather than just a long list of laments, because kind of have plenty of that, I think.
Well, like I said, I would prefer that you automatically separate the boys and girls from the start. See, the problem with these conversations is you're still trying to box in the boys and girls in one simple environment. And that's cool, but that's not really the way to go if we're trying to get the best outcomes for these boys. And we already know that there's a point that boys got to be eventually separated from these girls. So why not do it right there as a start, you know? And it should be permanent. Permanently at this point, because we are in a crisis right now, unfortunately. Because we talking about the achievement to further the gap. You cannot further the gap when you have the boys in the same area with the girls. Sorry. We tried, people tried, we've seen it try, and it failed miserably. So you got to do something different. Yeah, no, likes got to spike up. I know. All right, let's keep going. Fairest first. And I'm not sure if you guys can hear me well or hear the tape well. Let me know. All right. And if y'all guys want me to drop the link for y'all want to come in and add y'all 2 cents, please let me know in the chat room. Fairest.
That's an interesting idea. I remember it was a few years ago that I first heard anyone question the notion of age segregation. It's like, this is something we take completely for granted in our school system, that you should segregate people by age, but that's hardly obvious. Like, age is at best a pretty good proxy for maturity and the kind of intelligence that develops year by year, right? That's the reason why age segregation makes any sense at all, is because it's a proxy for these other things, maturity and intelligence. insofar as we know a systematic way where men and women differ, where those things are not correlated, it would make a lot of sense to not use the imperfect proxy and really, get to the thing we care about. But I'm curious, how would you? So one theory says this is a problem that could be solved partly or completely by starting boys in school a year later than girls. Another theory would say there is something about the school system in general that just favors girls, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
How do you give that notion any stock, and how would you sort of test those competing theories?
Yeah, I think both things are true. I think it's true that there is this developmental gap, and that we shouldn't, as you just said. I think I like the way you just put it, which is this kind of is a proxy. But if it turns out to be, if age is not a great proxy for at least one identifiable group, then maybe don't use chronological age, or at least stagger it in the way that I've suggested. But then once they're in school too, there are some elements of schooling that do seem to be somewhat less friendly to males. It's quite hard to unpick the causal effects here. So we know, for example, that boys seem to do better if there are more male teachers around, especially in some particular subjects like English. And that appears to be particularly true for black boys, interestingly. And so there's something going on there, but we don't really know why. It's hard to say why. And there could be role modeling effects going on there. There could be something around the school ethos. There's just something about the atmosphere of a school. We do know that male teachers tend to be less like the female teachers to sort of problematize certain male behaviors, perhaps because they recognize them a bit more. But honestly,
no, male teachers should be teaching other young males. But you see, when a school system particularly, that is functioning for, unfortunately, preserving females, you're going to have these dilemmas. And all the data will back up any of this, what these gentlemen are saying. Because let's be honest, when a woman is teaching a boy, they're not going to see that boy as their brother. Hell, even the teacher will see them as potential of their own sons, depending on the racial background of the kids. They're going to look at it as just another child that is teaching in the classroom. No care, no empathy. And that sounds kind of harsh, but I'm just going to keep it real. You want to get the best outcome from these boys, you got to have the males in there teaching the boys. Because when another man's teaching a young man, it's going to hone in easier. Because another man's going to challenge this boy to be at his best. And they ain't going to take no ish for an answer. Failure is not an option. Mediocre is an option when a male teacher is teaching the class, especially amongst teaching these boys. And we all see this and we all know this. But then again, when you have systems that's designed for preservation of young girls that become women, indoctrinating, teach them all this nonsense, you're going to have these outcomes constantly when the boys that become men are malnourished, underachievers, and, are going to be left behind. And a lot of women like to brag on because it's some flex, and it's not really flex because these are the same young boys that will become men that you're going to be sitting there screwing, sucking, and hoping that will provide the necessities for your survival. I digress. Fair use.
Honestly, it's very hard to know what's going on, but we do know that the teaching profession is becoming more female. So only 24% of K-12 teachers are male now, only 1 in 10 elementary school teachers, and effectively no kindergarten teachers. In fact, as a share of the professions, there are fewer men teaching kindergarten than there are women flying US military planes.
Wow.
And I'm going to suggest that in terms of social welfare, it'd be more important to get more than 2% of men teaching early years education, not least because of the signaling that it sends to the next generation, than it is to have women flying in our fighter jets. Don't get me wrong. I want the best people flying our fighter jets. I don't care. I just want people.
It's too late, Richard. You've been cancelled. In
terms of the defense of the country, but in terms of
And one thing I do not like, and one thing I hate to the core, is this thing called canceling people. It is sick to my stomach when I hear people that want to be they're going to cancel people, and I wish they would cancel other people that's put out quality content and information like this, because this man, let's say Richard Reese has an opinion, he should not be canceled for that. That's his opinion and his opinion alone. We live it and we like it and respect it. End of story. Usually we don't like some things, we just do two things. Either we stay in the presence of it or we walk out. No in-betweens. Fair use, fair use.
Social welfare, I think, is a strong case for having more men in those professions. And so I'm quite convinced that getting more men into teaching would create a more male-friendly education system for some of the reasons that I've just suggested. And I think the third thing, so we have redshirting, we have more male teachers, but there's a woeful underinvestment in vocational training in the US in particular. And it looks like vocational training, so technical training, and especially technical high schools and apprenticeships seem to work on average much better for boys and men than they do for girls and women. And so the fact that we're one of the consequences of a kind of college, obsession with college as opposed to vocational track has been inadvertently to actually make things a little bit more difficult for boys and men in the education system.
So all of this relates to a perennial debate about the differences between men and women. I think no one argues that men and women have all the same traits at the mean, really. For one thing, men are much more likely to commit violent crimes, etc. As you say, women are much more likely to be teachers, men more likely to be, etc. No one argue, everyone's aware of those, but people disagree about the reason for that. And there's a perennial nature versus nurture debate here. Is it that society teaches boys to like fire trucks and blue and teaches girls to like pink and ballet? And if society just started teaching differently, then all of the gender differences would disappear? Or is it that men and women are different genetically in the chromosomes, and that causes understandable differences in behavior and personality at the mean? So all of that is lurking behind this conversation, and I'm curious where you come down on that.
Yeah, well, the first point I would make is that the single biggest difference, particularly in terms of brain development, is not in how men and women develop, but in when. Mm-hmm. And it is this huge difference we just talked about, right? And so there isn't really any controversy about the difference in the maturation rates of girls and boys, right? There really isn't. Anybody sensible thinks. By the time we get to 25, those differences have gone, but they haven't all gone. And I did decide to include a chapter where I addressed this question of sex differences. It was interesting that some reviewers were saying, well, you don't really need it. Maybe go without it. Do you really want to wade into this water? Why do this? Why get into the extent to which these differences are natural as opposed to socialized? And honestly,
why get into one of the most interesting fundamental questions of the whole?
Oh, you know why? I mean, you all people, you know why. All right.
Right.
Don't make any. I don't know if you're trying to be strategic and about a persuasive project like this one, then I think it is important to consider like which battles to fight and which issues to address. But I didn't really find very many good faith treatments of the issue out there, honestly. And I thought I could offer one. And so I did get into some of these differences. And the things to say are the distributions overlap, the differences at the mean, but they're not trivial in some cases. You've alluded to one already, which is a propensity to aggression. And I find the nature-nurture debate frustrating on a couple of levels. One is obvious, which is it's obviously both, and everybody will say that. And then they'll...
Wait, before we continue, another side note, this is a little off topic a little bit. If women were so concerned about the nature of young boys that become men, if this was such a concerning, right? I would always ask, so you want men to be men on your terms? I should ask the question. And I should get a real honest answer, yes or no. And the reason why I ask this question is because that's what it's laid out. You want it in a way that you want a utopia or a world where you women hear me roar, you go to school, get the degrees and all stuff, and thus you go on the carousel ride as long as you can, and eventually when you're ready, you should be able to pick any man that is doing what I guess what he's supposed to be doing, or he becomes a very valuable man in a high areas and of fields and whatever. That is the playbook that a lot of women want and want to have. And they, in their mind, if they can't control it, they will not do without and want nothing to do with it. So it goes to purpose say, so where are these men going to come from? Because you're malnourishing, and even go as far as not even educating the boys enough so they could become some. You're just keeping them around. And it's much worse than a reach back. You just keep them around for what if, for your own comfort. And I'm sorry to say this, but it comes to point that most young men that we come in are not going to just be around waiting or going to be playing or sitting back being the comfort man to a whole lot of modern women. They're going to be moving like and act like men, and they're going to dictate the outcomes on their terms. So I hope you understand that, because I find that, you know, brain development, all that important stuff, yeah, it's important, but let's really be underlined. It's always been about, I need to be the head in charge. I need control. And if it doesn't serve me or I can't control it, I will discard or I will do without. And that's the honest answer. That's what most modern women want. So let's keep going.
What people do is they say they both matter and then proceed to only talk about one of them.
Right.
Depending on their priors, right? So they have a sentence somewhere saying, of course, both matter, but the rest of my book is going to be about why it's all nurture or why it's all nature. So that's frustrating. But the second reason is just because my view is the fact that there are natural differences between men and women in terms of risk-taking, sex drive, aggression, people, things, orientation, doesn't make culture less important. It makes it more important. Because culture affects the way in which those natural tendencies are expressed or not, the ways in which they're channeled, the ways in which they're valorized or not. And so it is perfectly possible to say that there is a higher propensity to aggression and violence among men, obvious and true, and that's not just socialization. There's a huge gap. There's like a 5-fold gap in rates of aggression at 17 months old. And I think you have to be borderline nuts to think that by the age of 17 months, you've been so thoroughly socialized into thinking that boys hit each other and girls don't, that that's the reason for the gap. And so, but we also have to take into account the fact that rates of violent crime have halved in the last few decades, and that rates of violent crime are completely different in one country compared to the country right next to it. And so the idea that culture doesn't matter for the way in which an innate tendency expresses itself or doesn't is just crazy. The denial of natural differences, ironically, ends up meaning we pay less attention to culture and to the institutions and norms that help us to manage nature. And so there's a weird byproduct of the blank slate approach is to actually make culture, take culture less seriously than we ought to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's always been in some way a false dichotomy or a false framing, in the narrow sense that part of human nature is to absorb culture. The reason we absorb culture is because we are wired to absorb culture, right? Like we're wired to pick up the language that we grow up learning, to pick up, to imitate, and so in that sense, it's
I think, I mean, Roy Baumeister's book on this, The Cultural Animal, is I think just a brilliant statement of that.
In
and
fact,
Joseph
that's like
Henrich.
It's like what separates us most arguably from other
yes,
animals.
we're evolved to be cultural animals. And Joseph Henrich's work that I also cite quite a lot on co-evolution and how culture and nature co-evolve. That's where the serious scholarship is. And so what it is, the question then is like, okay, so let's think about what kinds of cultural institutions and norms bring out, say, the best in men and bring out the best in women if they differ on average. And I think that's the real question. And that question is avoided by an insistence that it's either one or the other.
When it comes to hiring,
okay. Hold on, guys. I had an issue. All right. And let me see if I can fast forward this. I want to find what name of his book. Hold on.
Years, which is to say,
Hold on.
part of the notion.
Matter of fact, before I continue, let me see if I can find this brother's book, because his book was very intriguing. I don't own the book, but I looked it up online, and let me see if I can find now. Before I continue this, where did I put the link for his book? Was this one? No, that's not it. Where the hell I did with the book? I should have looked at it when I was playing. All right, screw. You know, I'm gonna keep running. I'm gonna waste the time. Let me keep running this, guys, because I'll find it eventually. But like I said, to the point, it is. Yeah, I'm just gonna run because I have no comment.
Of the feminization of Western society. I mean, I've read some things which have sort of coined this phrase that Western nations have undergone a feminization process in the past 50 years, which is to say the cultures and structures have become more friendly to attributes, held more often by females than by men. Whereas, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it was in many ways the opposite. I mean, I think there's certainly something to this. I mean, there's no denying that it's happened. I mean, there's some people that think it's a bad thing, although I probably see more positives than I do negatives in it. So, like, for example, the total overhaul in the culture of bullying in America, right? Like, you talk to people who grew up 2 generations ago, the concept that bullying was a big problem in school to be solved would be laughed out of, it would just be laughed out of the average dinner table conversation. Whereas now schools in general take bullying as a concept to be inherently bad and to be something to really crack down on and take seriously. And, if stereotypically male values were to rule society, I think the attitude towards bullying would be suck it up.
Yeah, well, in general, I think that the folks who are talking about the feminization of culture are largely mistaking the equalization of culture for the feminization, right? And what we're seeing is just a balancing of the culture in such a way that let's use the labels of feminine and masculine with all the caveats of overlapping and on average, and not say that every time, because that's boring. That's boring for us if we have to keep saying that every time. So we'll just take it for granted, right? We're in a square bracket on average, the distributions overlap. That if there are these differences, then actually giving more equal weight to concerns from both sides is important. So bullying is a great example. Like, when I hear my kids talk about it, my kids are in their 20s now, I'm in my early 50s. The school I went to, there was a lot of physical bullying. And I spent quite a bit of time physically afraid. And there were certain areas you really didn't want to go to and people you needed to avoid and really bad things that could happen to you. And I was fearful. I mean, I can remember to this day some of the physical fear I would feel in parts of the school around certain people. Fear for bodily fear. And I talk to my kids about that now, and they have no idea what I'm talking about.
All right. Here's the important one. All right, good thing you mentioned about the bully. Let me say something about bullying. And me as a man, young boy, I never really got or suffered issues with what we call bullying for a reason. Maybe I was a lucky one. Maybe. I mean, lucky because I think at the time I was very intimidating back then. So I was you could say the lucky one, never got really bullied like that. If they even tried to, which they don't. But anyhow, I only can speak for myself. But if you're a young man or any man that could speak per se, if you're still active or in the comment section, I want you to lay out this. Have you ever been bullied before when you were growing up? And if so, how do you overcome or face the bully? I would really surely like to hear this in the comment section if you got far to this point of the stream. My take on bullying is simple. You beat that bully's butt. You confront the bully and you show him who is the boss, the real boss. Because the notion of bullying is going to either make or break you as a young lad going into teenager and even go as far as into adulthood. Is how you're able to overcome obstacles and to overcome your greatest fear. Because when you have bullies in front of you, picking on you, tapping on you, hell, even go as far as messing you up physically, beating you up, it only going to solidify how you are going to be function as a young man inside and how far you come and deal with adversity. I think, not feel, that a bully is a necessity. Now, a lot of people say, well, some bullies will sit there, cause bodily harms, and even go as far as deleting children. My take on this is your child should be able to deal with the world as is. If you're a boy, you should know that your life is very much uncertain in a very uncertain environment. Any given take, you could lose your life on the given notice for the little things, not even big things, little things. Is how you're able to handle and deal with the adversities or able to solve your problems when you're getting bullied. Now, we'll take a page from Uncle D's book. One thing with his kids, because he has all three boys, he knows sure enough that his sons are not get bullied by nobody anytime soon. Because like a father, he prepares his sons in regards to physical activity, jiu-jitsu, martial arts, you name it. He trains his sons up so not only to do harm, but to protect themselves. How many young boys nowadays are taking physical activity in regards that they will have to confront somebody if need to protect themselves? I'll wait. All right, I'll wait. None. So by default, your sons, if you're raised by either one parent or both, are not preparing your son how to deal with adversity and how to solve his problems. Now, some bullying, you could have a conversation with the teacher and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, your son should be able to function in any environment and deal with adversity and overcome it and become the victor, in my opinion. He should not be the victim. Victim will not sustain you. It will not ensure your survival if you're a young boy becoming into young men. You must learn to deal with the adversity. That would be the best, not only advice, but best outcomes, anything in regards how you deal with bullying. Let's keep going. Fair use, fair use. And if you guys agree with me, say yes. If not, you know.
It's like I've come from another planet. The idea that people are actually hitting each other or spitting on each other or bringing knives out on each other, it's literally an alien, but they have no idea what I'm talking about. I have to tell you, I think that's a great development. Now, could it go too far the other way such that some of the normal friction of growing up becomes mislabeled as bullying because of an oversensitivity to anything that could possibly be considered bullying. Sure, absolutely. Which is why we need the balance, which is why I think gender balance is good, because to the extent they're different, that's why male teachers are good. That's why it's good to have male teachers and female teachers, because they're each going to bring different sensitivities and sensibilities to the question. But by and large, I got to tell you, it looks to me more like equalization than feminization. And we haven't got to a point yet where I'm very troubled in many areas about the fact that this has become too feminized, with the possible exception of educational success, which I'm afraid is getting wrapped up with feminine identity in a way that could be dangerous.
I really do think, and I agree with you about this, I think most domains of society have just been equalizing. But education specifically has probably feminized. It's probably tilted to favor the average woman more than the average man. And one area that that is really related here is the notion of ADHD. Like, this is something I sometimes get into trouble with, because I really question the pathologizing of the kid that can't sit still in class. Right? Like, the truth is, I've never met anyone that can just focus on anything. Or sorry, I misspoke there. I've never met anyone that can't focus in general ever. Right? I've met people that cannot focus when they're sitting for 6 hours a day, getting information fed to them in a way that is totally unnatural to the human condition. But like, as a musician, for example, I know brilliant and successful professional musicians, not just mediocre, amazing musicians that can sit and practice a piano if they're interested for 5-6 hours, but cannot read a homework assignment that they find boring, right? That's not a generic inability to pay attention. That's boredom with a very specific task that we demand of people only in the past couple hundred years. And we give these people Adderall and which is not to say we shouldn't be giving them Adderall necessarily. I'm not giving medical advice, but we have this category of ADHD, which again is like, I think I looked it up just today. You'd probably know better, but according to Google, it's like 4-to-1 diagnosis, male versus female, right? It's like 4 boys are being diagnosed for every one girl being diagnosed. And basically we are saying you have a disorder because of your inability to sit still in a classroom for 6 hours, 5 days a week, 9 months out of the year, where, I mean, it's possible just school, that kind of school is not going to be where you flourish in life. And that's okay. It's like, for instance, if somebody can't run really fast and jump high and isn't super coordinated, we don't say you have a disorder. We just say probably pro sports is not for you, right? Yet we pathologize something that I consider normal, which is only being able to focus on stuff you really, really, really like.
I agree with everything you've just said, and it's quite personal for me. It's quite clear now that one of my kids has been diagnosed with quite well. He's great.
I've noticed somebody says that ADHD does not exist. I'm not sure if you want to elaborate. If you could put in a super chat, it'd be better. I'd like to hear that. All right, let's keep going.
Now, but with quite severe ADHD, it's obvious that that's what I would have been labeled with when I was at school. But we didn't have diagnosis then. And there was enough flexibility, I think, in the curriculum. It wasn't quite so rigid that you couldn't wriggle your way through. And I think it's one of the reasons why vocational learning can be really helpful. I'm thinking about, there is this ability to hyperfocus as well. So I'm thinking about my son in particular is really, really struggled in school. For precisely the reasons that you've just said, which is the need to sustain attention at a task that's intrinsically dull, because your prefrontal cortex is telling you it'll help you get to college, which will make for a good life, right? Which boys don't have to anything like the same extent as girls. And so you're dying inside. I remember at school just looking out of the window and imagining things in my head just to sort of survive, making up stories in my head just to survive. Excruciating sense of sitting in that plastic chair for so long. And I saw my son go through it too. But get him on a task he's interested in, our refrigerator breaks and he has to completely take the circuit board apart and fix it. 5 hours, completely undivided. Like, actually, you can't get him to stop focusing on it because he's got interested in it. Right. And I agree. So pedagogically, the danger is the education system has inadvertently, and I'm not going to blame anybody for this, has just ended up being structured in a way that is less male friendly. It does reward long periods of sitting still. Boys do need more physical outlet. That ability to kind of focus on intrinsically quite dull tasks rather than let them be more project led. More focus on like books rather than vocational, etc. So you're right. And the danger is then it gets pathologized. So the ADHD numbers are striking, but I also discovered when I was looking at this that 23% of American boys are diagnosed with some kind of developmental disability. And I have to think, really? Maybe it's the system at that point, right? When you get into those sorts of numbers, you think, really, that does, and it's correct against all these definitions, including things like ADHD, that they have a developmental disability. But there's a certain point where you have to start to wonder if it's the institutions that are failing the boys rather than the boys that are failing in the institutions.
Yeah. And I would make a sharp distinction between something like ADHD and something.
Well, to ask the question, you must answer the question. I would say the institutions have failed the boys. And the reason why I say institutions failed the boys is because institutions were designed to dumb you down. There was a good book by I think it was a substitute teacher, and he wrote about, it was titled Dumbing Us Down. I have that book. I read that book. Very good book. And the man that's been in education for like nearly 30 years at the time when he wrote this book was released back in 92. He tells you the trials and tribulations of education, what it is, how it's constructed, and why is it that it's not only failing boys, but just failing people that still support the American education system today. Why it is. I would say I'll highly advise everybody to look the book up. It's called Dumbing Us Down, and I forgot the name of the author, but his name will pop up. Well, actually, I'm gonna find the name of the book as I'm playing this to give you the name of the title of the author. Let's keep going. Fairies.
Something like autism, because if you have autism or Asperger's and you struggle to understand people's facial cues, that's a disadvantage regardless of how society is structured. That's intrinsically a disadvantage in life given how important human communication is, right? Whereas in most societies up till about 2 seconds ago, and in some societies today, the suite of symptoms we call ADHD might not be dysfunctional at all. It would be totally within the realm of normal and in some sense positive. It's like you said, I've been I'm a person that some people view as smart, and I read books and I interview people like you, and you're a guy that writes books, and I'm writing my book as
and
well.
You're writing a book, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yet I've struggled mightily to pay attention and focus, even for very short periods of time in classes that the majority of classes I had in college and many in high school too. I mean, it was a mighty struggle for me. If I wasn't able to cram lots of information in an emergency setting before an exam, I would have done poorly instead of excellently at Columbia. And, like my intelligence, whatever intelligence I have, is really, it's almost only brought out when I'm super interested in something. And then I can focus for, lengths of time that are like possibly dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So.
And it's also why it's why I had.
All right. The book's called Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. Excellent book. I advise to get. And one other thing I do want to share, I want to take a brief little intermission. This is the book that I will share, and it's from Pelican Books, I think. This is by the guy, the brother you see that's talking to Richard Reeves. His book came out. It's called The End of Race Politics: Argument for a Colorblind America by Coleman Hughes. That's the name of the guy that's doing the interview. So the shameless plug. This is his book. This is only first book. So yeah, guys, if you if you do respect what the man was doing in an interview with Richard Reeves, I mean, I would advise, check his book out. I probably would one of these days. I'll check his book out. But meanwhile, it's always good to see the young man like himself finally wrote a book that we all could look and appreciate. All right, let's keep going. Fair use.
Why, in the long run, I think it all kind of works out because.
One other thing, I forgot to do this. I have to do this. Shameless plug. I know what time it is. Please check, please, guys. I know it is.
I want my money. I told you. Where is my money? Betty, bring me everyone.
I need my money. I need my money.
What do you mean everyone?
Labor market.
Please support the channel, support the Chaos Rain Show, either super chat or Cash App, the $ Chaos 8 Rain. All right, let's continue. Berries.
Assuming you have a pretty pluralistic labor market, provides lots of opportunities to match your particular idiosyncrasies to a role. And so, like, if you've got my kind of attention deficit problems, which sounds like is similar to yours, then actually being a journalist was terrific. Right, hyper focus for a while on something. There was a subject I was interested in, it was economics, and then file it and then start again the next day.
Yeah.
It was fast. It was high adrenaline. All of those things work. And then I just, I've always found ways to do work that's intrinsically interesting to me. And because it's interesting to me and I have cognitive skills, I can succeed at it. Yeah. And so the labor market, I think it just has so many niches in it. I say this to my kids all the time. It's like, don't worry about school. You'll be okay in the labor market. But the education system is the opposite. The education system is the opposite of plural. It's incredibly unitary. It's incredibly prescriptive. And it rewards these non-cognitive skills, the ability to stick with tasks that are not intrinsically that interesting, but which will pay off in certain tangible ways in the education system. Those are rewarded, like your GPA. And you're seeing colleges now moving away from even using the SAT or ACT in admissions, which means GPA will get more important. And girls are smoking boys at GPA. Among the high schoolers with the top 10% GPAs, 2/3 of them are girls. At the bottom, 2/3 of them are boys. And GPA is a great example of something that does reward the stuff that many people struggle with, and boys especially, which is turning in the homework, doing the boring stuff. Why would you do that? And the answer is because it'll get you a good GPA. But why do you care about a good GPA? To get to a good college. Why do you care about that? I mean, you're not future oriented enough to think about that. And so that's one of the ways in which the education system is structured to favor girls on average than boys. Again, totally, it's not a feminist plot. Feminists didn't sit down 100 years ago and design the education system this way. In fact, they weren't the ones doing it. It was men. But but now that girls have had the sort of brakes taken off and are heading off to college in such numbers, I think we can see how the education system is structurally not working for boys and men, and we can have some positive solutions to it. And that doesn't in any way mean we should be trying to roll back the tide on women's educational success. It means we should be helping the boys and men keep up.
So that dovetails right into the conversation about the labor market and men dropping out of the labor force, men not working in as high numbers as they used to. So can you give us a sense of what the change has been here in the past 50 years and what's behind it?
Before he gives change, what in regards to labor market, matter of fact, I give you my assessment about this labor market. Labor market as we know it is unfortunately obsolete. You work for somebody else, it is considered obsolete to you. But a person that already established what we call the corporation, the business, they are more secure and safe. Hell, they're always secure and safe, but the government backs them, with the necessary tax exempts. Hell, if y'all guys remember when we had the crash back roughly 16 years ago, the few that got bailed at first was the bigger corporation, the car manufacturer, I think, and some other institutions I can't name off the head because it was like a long time ago. But you didn't get bailed out. if you were working and they had to make cuts, you're the first one to be gone, unfortunately. And it's sad to say that, but let's keep real. The labor market is what it is. It's a constantly revolving door where it's you as the employer, your work consider not necessity. And you could be, letting go on any given notice, depending on how the business side of things work, or they're not just willing to pay you what your worth is. Either or, the labor market as it stands is always an ever revolving door where you can compete all you want, but then they always gonna find somebody better or someone that could do the job or the outcomes for less. And that's how you look at it. All right, let's keep going. Fair use, fair use.
Yeah, so there's been a long run drop in male labor force participation. But it's important to be specific here because the large majority of the drop is among less educated men. So among high school educated men, it's like 1 in 3 out of the labor force. It's about 5 million men. Mm-hmm. Nick Eberstadt out of AEI has a new book out on what's non-working men, what are they doing, and he shows quite clearly that it is less educated. So the more education guys have, the higher generally their labor force participation rates are. So it's a general long-term trend, but huge class gaps. Meanwhile, we've seen women's labor force participation rise, although it has leveled out a little bit recently. So then the question is why? And I think there are some good reasons why, which is we have seen the rise in the ability of women to earn. And so at the margins, you're seeing some men who don't have to earn. But the much bigger reasons, I think, are that traditionally male jobs have declined precipitously over the last 40, 50 years. And this is obvious: manufacturing, heavy industry, etc. And men haven't, by and large, moved into some of the growing occupations which are more female-dominated, such as in health and education, at all. And so they're somewhat stuck between the labor market of their dad and the labor market of their wife. And haven't managed to kind of make that adjustment back through. It's not helped when politicians come along and promise to wave a magic wand and bring back the labor market of the 50s. So the result of that is quite a bit of detachment from men. But by and large, they're not coming out of the labor. I wish I could say they were coming out of the labor market to care for kids and care for others. They're by and large not. By and large, it's not clear exactly what a lot of them are doing when they're out of the labor market. But it's not, unlike for women, when women aren't in the labor market, it's usually because they're doing something else. With men, it's not clear what they're doing. And I think there we have to ask ourselves hard questions about the role of men and the role of men in the family. I think that the danger is of making men feel benched if they can't fulfill the traditional breadwinner role. That reduces their incentive to go into the labor market. I'm sure that's part of the story.
Right. So if a man feels like what he's good at is the breadwinning, not the child rearing, and he would have done really well in a factory job that allowed him to get proverbial white picket fence 50 years ago, let's say, but those jobs just aren't available. You're saying, he is less likely to work, or less likely to even try to find a job because it's less certain, or it seems less certain that he would even be able to be a breadwinner for a family given the jobs he could do.
Yeah, that's right. The causal arrow, as usual, runs both ways. I think it's quite clear that changes in family structure have had an effect on male labor supply, and so to the extent that a guy doesn't feel like he has to fill that role of breadwinner, that reduces his incentives to be in the labor market. But it's also true that if men are out of work or struggling to earn a decent wage, that makes them much less attractive as marriage prospects or as mate prospects. And so they're less likely to form a family. And there's good evidence for both of those trends, I think, which is that they're basically feeding off each other. And so that's a particular issue in the lower income the community, the more true that is, because that's where men's wages have absolutely cratered at the bottom of the labor market. And so you're seeing, they're also actually very often places where these traditional roles are quite often still held, at least in theory, which is this idea of the male breadwinner. So in precisely the parts of the country and among the men who are least able to fulfill this traditional role, that's quite often where the role is still held as this kind of ideal. And so the tragedy is that actually it's the very men who feel most strongly they should be the breadwinner who are least able to be the breadwinner in today's labor market. So there's a big lag there. And the result, I think, is that men effectively bench themselves, because the message from society is still, they feel, is still, if you can't be a breadwinner, what use are you? And many of them can't be a breadwinner, certainly can't be a sole breadwinner anymore. And so this sense of redundancy isn't just an economic term. It actually starts to feel like a cultural redundancy as well, which results in a lot of these men being somewhat lost, because they look at the mothers of their kids who are working and raising the kids. Meanwhile, the mothers are having to do everything. So the
Well, we had to keep in mind that most majority of Americans, especially women, worked. There was not one part in this existence, unless you're talking about slavery, when women didn't rarely work at all. Personally. And we know the data, we've seen the numbers, women work. Often they want now is they want some man to be so-called emotionally intelligent, be that softer side, while they still pay for pretty much all or every little things, unfortunately. And actually, to be personally honest, men have to do more and women are doing less. So really, you're not even getting the outcomes from women you're dealing with now, because they're doing very little, very less, and will have you as a man do more. Ain't that something? God, you gotta hate society. But that's what the world we live in today, unfortunately. Anyhow, let's keep going. I'm only gonna run like another, how many more minutes? Maybe 15 more minutes of this, maybe less. We'll see. Various.
tragedy here is it's terrible for women as well, because they end up working what Arlie Hochschild calls the second shift. You're the breadwinner and the carer, and that's true for a huge number of women.
Mm-hmm. Do you connect this in your mind at all to the problem of deaths of despair? Obviously the opioid crisis is the main case of this, the massive rise in opioid deaths and fentanyl deaths, but just deaths of despair in general, suicide, which is disproportionately a male phenomenon. So I guess questions are, do you connect the labor force issue to that? Is that a trend that makes sense with the data? And also, can you just speak a little bit about suicide in general? I mean, a lot of people don't know that most suicides are by men to begin with. And so can you talk a little bit about the source of that gender disparity too?
Yeah, it is about a threefold gap. That men are about 3 times more likely to commit suicide than women. It varies a little bit across the age range. And actually, there's a race gap there too, to make things even more complicated. Actually, middle-aged white men are at the highest risk of suicide, followed by young white men. And so there's race, there's class, there's gender, but the biggest gap of all is this gender one. You see it in a lot of different places. And when I was doing this work, I came across this study by, I can't remember her first name now, Dr. Shand. It's an Australian researcher, and they'd done something really interesting, which is they'd looked at the phrases that men had used before committing suicide or attempting suicide in terms of trying to get it like motivations. And the top words that they found were words like worthless and useless. And so I think that this sense of what's the point of me, what's my purpose, what value am I bringing, is what lies behind a lot of suicide, for sure. And so it relates to some of the conversations we were just having. It's worth saying, I think, that their attempted suicide rates, the gap in attempted suicide rates is much less. It's in completed suicides where it's really big. But more generally, the deaths of despair point is a good one. It's about a threefold difference there as well. Like, men are 3 times more likely to die from either suicide or some sort of drug overdose or alcohol. And I think that is about this purpose and connection that you feel. And it's striking that one of the reasons why opioid deaths are so much higher than for other drugs is because the user is very often on their own and indoors. And so, whereas you think about some drugs, they're drugs you take when you want to go party, right? Or you you want to chill with your friends. So you smoke pot to chill with your friends. You might have MDMA because you're going out to a club, or opioids you take on your own. Opioids are drugs of retreat and drugs of despair. They're painkillers in the broader sense, I think. And so it's no surprise to me that it is working class men who are particularly vulnerable to opioid overdoses. And as I said, they're very often just found on their own. They were not partying. They were not with somebody else. They were alone. And I think that the dislocation that a lot of men are facing, especially working class men, is at the root of many of these deaths of despair problems.
So you had a neat, if not solution, a way forward on the education issue. Do you have a way forward on the labor market issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one for me is just look at where the jobs are coming from and help men to get into them. It's that sounds like a very simple solution, but it's a real problem that we've worked very hard to get women into many previously male-dominated jobs, but we haven't done the same the other way around. And so a good example here is STEM. Right? One of the things I also discovered was that the original acronym wasn't STEM; it was SMET. And then the woman, and she changed it. She was like, "This is a terrible acronym. I'm going to change it to STEM." And literally overnight,
sounds like a fluid that shouldn't be coming out of one of my body parts or something.
I don't know where to go with it, but SMET was a really hard sell. STEM turned out to be went absolute gangbusters. There was almost immediately a caucus in Congress. There was a discussion, and and it became so it was a brilliant move on her part. To get an acronym in. And actually we've, partly because of just we needed it for the nation, but also just getting women into STEM was a big thing, as well as women into law and medicine and all those other professions that were previously very, very male indeed. I mean, hugely male dominated. But a lot of the jobs that are growing fastest now are in what I call the HEAL sector. So that's like the mirror image of STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, is HEAL, which is health, education, administration, literacy skills as opposed to mathematical skills. And they're like huge sectors like nursing, teaching, psychology, social work, counseling, social care provision, etc. And for every one job we're going to create in STEM between now and 2030, we're going to create about 3 in HEAL. But those professions are not only incredibly female dominated, most of them are becoming more so. And so the gender desegregation of the labor market has been almost entirely one way. And in some cases, it's been quite precipitous, the decline, like psychology. I'll take one example. Psychology has gone from 39% male to 29% male the last decade. And
Before we continue, guys, I'm just looking at something right now. Hold on. STEM and HEAL. And I know they're trying to get more women into the STEM because it is male dominated. And the word on the street is why women either do good or do poorly in STEM is because STEM is, and to me, is more of a problem-solving field. You cover all the aspects, science, technology, etc., math, and all that stuff, which not saying women can't do math, but let's keep it real. When it requires more work and women like to do things a little bit more easier, in a sense, they're not really gonna be so how can I say this? So pleased to be doing more of the male work where it requires more. I mean, a lot of women, they want work to be as simple, easy as possible, and get them into those type of fields and get more for a reason. It goes to show that they're doing that because they look for more affordable labor to get the same production outcomes for less. Because if you hire women are most likely not gonna ask a raise on all that stuff. And if they do, most likely they're not gonna be able to negotiate much of anything, and they're just gonna hire somebody else. That's how it works. They're trying to get the same production for less. If it was a man that they had no skills, you can't really shortchange certain men because certain men are not going to really allow them to be shortchanged. They're going to be frustrated and want more. And they should ask for more. But, there's a difference between men and women in regards to ask for more than they're worth, pay-wise. let's continue fair use. And we're almost 10 more minutes into this, and we're at halfway mark of this. So let's keep going.
Psychologists under the age of 30, only 5% are male. So you just run that forward in terms of what it'll mean. And that matters a lot for clients as well, by the way, for providers. But from an economic point of view, helping to get men into those jobs through scholarships, just like as we did for women into STEM, through subsidies to employers, to diversify those sectors, including this massive male recruitment drive into teaching, which I just referred to. So I think that's it. Men are a little bit stuck right now between like this world as it was and the world as it is. And we have to destigmatize and degender some of these professions. Nursing is another great example. We're still only at 12% nursing are male. And that's just a crazy low number, given what a huge occupation that is. And of course, in some of these occupations like nursing and teaching, we're facing potential big labor shortages. But we're trying to solve them with only half the workforce.
All right. So let me fast forward this. All right. Almost done, guys.
Or called a male rights activist saying, oh, so you want to have scholarships specifically for men to become psychologists or nurses?
Yeah.
Boo-hoo. Don't you realize women are by far more oppressed in our society? And I fear that person would just get laughed out of the room, and everyone who agrees with that person would get terrified into silence.
You can start saying Richard Reeves rather than that person at this point, Coleman. You're being very polite, but everyone listening, that person.
Yeah.
Who could you be talking about?
Right. But yeah, I mean, we'd have to undergo a serious cultural shift in the elites and relevant decision makers for the logic of these points to be carried out in policy. I mean, I could imagine it happening in theory. I could imagine it happening, pushing boys back, going to kindergarten at 6 instead of 5. I can imagine that if public education were at all rational and responsive to like reason, and things could change quickly, which is not the case. But I can't imagine it with my current perception of the culture, which is a real shame.
Well, I mean, I guess to some extent I'm testing that proposition here. I should say that I lead the argument about getting more men into these occupations with an employment argument, this is where the jobs are coming from. But I think if I'm making the argument again, in fact, if I could go back and rewrite the chapter, I think what I would do, and you're obviously always rewriting even after you've finished writing. I think I'd focus more. I think it's more persuasive to talk about how it's important for those professions and the users of those professions for there to be more men in them. I was talking to a journalist about the book, from a very progressive outlet, and I was interested to know how that would go. And she talked about her dad in a care home and how when he needs to go to the bathroom, which he needs a lot of help with, he'd really like a guy, but there are no guys.
Right.
And I think a lot of women in that situation want the same too. Or if you're a guy and you need to go to see a counselor about, an addiction to pornography, maybe that would be easier with a male guy. If you're a boy who's got special needs at school, maybe it would be helpful if the special needs teachers had some men. And so actually I find that argument lands much more with people, which is the diversity of those professions is not just because I think we need to help men get into those jobs for their own needs, but because, well, first of all, they got shortages, but for the users of those services. Do we really want a world where there are no male social workers or male teachers or male nurses or carers? Do you as a man or want to be in a hospital where a guy can't help you in the bathroom? Do you? Or a woman? I mean, so I find that argument more persuasive. And if I can persuade with that, then I could say it's going to take some money. We're going to have to because these professions are so gendered, it will take special incentives like scholarships and subsidies, exactly as we are doing for women into STEM. There are hundreds of scholarships and subsidies to get women into STEM jobs and STEM courses at colleges, and that's great. Why can't we do the same? And maybe there are compelling arguments why we can't, but I haven't encountered.
Now, I had to pause this. I've been hearing lately from certain men in certain parts of social media, and we could say even YouTube, say there are programs for these men. I would like somebody to reveal that, please. Because this is a need, and this is what's lacking. I should not be able to really be searching in it. I should have any person say, this is the program specifically focused on this particular gender, not say for everybody. Because we all know when it's everybody, it means who's going to get most of this? Mostly the ones that they want to pay to get the cheap, affordable labor, which is mostly, unfortunately, women. For those that don't know. Let's continue. Fair use, fair use. We're almost gonna be done here, guys.
Counted them yet, and I think it's time to have that conversation. I think we can have that conversation now. Could be proved wrong. Ask me again in 2 months' time. But it feels to me like we can't just keep watching these professions have fewer and fewer men in them with every year, and not do anything about it. That feels culturally irresponsible to me.
When you were talking just now, I was reminded of a story in my family where my uncle, my mother's brother, had HIV in the 90s, AIDS, and was in the hospital. And my father, his beard was growing in the hospital bed, and it was very itchy and uncomfortable for him. And my father shaved him. And it was quite a big deal because less was known about AIDS at the time, and it was a scary thing, and you were afraid you could catch it just from. Some people were afraid you could catch it just from contact. But it was just this moment where he needed a man to take care of something that men know how to do better, namely shave a face, and clearly there were no nurses around to do it. In any event, I think that's a great sort of line of argument.
I mean, as I've talked to people about it, I actually find that people are open to the idea that it would be better to have more men in those professions. Certainly that we shouldn't just allow the trends to go the way they're going, and not do anything about it. And so let's say it's a problem that we've got fewer and fewer men in these professions, including teaching and psychology and so on. Let's say, then the question is, well, what do we do about them? Why aren't men going into those professions? And we have some data on that. And one of the reasons is because they think it's too female. And it looks actually in some cases if there's even sort of disproportionately going to be gay men that select into those occupations as well. So it gets tied up with issues around sexuality as well sometimes too. And so unless we can reduce the stigma for men going into those professions, one of my sons works in childcare and early years education, and he runs into this all the time. He's actually not got jobs explicitly because they say, no, our parents won't trust their kids around a man.
Yeah, right.
And so we have to be careful. We're going to reap what we sow here. And I think so there's a cultural shift here, and just some policy, some scholarships. Like there's an act in Congress now called the STEM Restart Act to kind of give employers incentives to take women and ethnic minorities into STEM. Great. How about doing the same for HEAL jobs for men? And I would argue in some cases, especially men of color, but just men. How about that? Like, why not? What's the argument against it if you buy that it's a problem and we should do something about it? Because right now, otherwise, we're doing nothing. And we're doing nothing because I don't think many conservatives are actually, the conservatives who are worried about it don't like the idea of using public policy to address it. And the progressives who like using public policy aren't convinced yet that this is a problem we need to address. And so the result is there are no policies to address it. And in fact, no attention is even paid to it.
In fact, on the point of progressives, I would go further. I would say for many of them, the ideology they subscribe to in principle blinds them to seeing that this kind of thing could be a problem. In other words, it's not, some people that are persuadable by evidence aren't the problem. Generally, people that have an ideology which says women are by nature across the board in every way more oppressed than men. We live in a patriarchy, and for whom that idea is all encompassing. There are no exceptions to that worth talking about. They're not going to be able to see or be moved in any kind of urgent way by these sorts of arguments. And I mean, that comes to,
And another side note, because I'm already halfway into this, there's going to be a point where Rich Breeze, if you caught early parts of this stream, said about the necessary programs that could have helped Black boys that will become Black men. Let's see if we get to that part. And I hope you guys are getting some out of this, because really true, when I came across this, I had to think about it. Think really hard and long about this. And I come to the conclusion that, you know, if the so-called zaddy that Black women indulge in, like, and said it can't do no wrong, is telling you that, yes, you are your own worst enemy. And not only that, you are also the cause of the stagnation of these boys that become men. And he has cold-hearted, you know, revealed the same women that are in so-called position of power are doing to block young men that will become men for progress is alarming. It's scary. It's frightening. I'm telling you right now. Yeah, let's see if we can wrap this soon up. Yeah, I'm wrapping this up in a little bit. All right, fairies.
To this argument of the intersection of race and gender here, which is something I've been thinking about a lot, and we talked about a few months ago when you mentioned your thesis in this book. Ever since the rise of intersectionality, of intersectional feminism, which is what Kimberly Crenshaw invented in the late 80s, early 90s, there's been this idea that's very popular on elite college campuses and in other places, which basically says different kinds of bigotry are more than the sum of their parts. It basically says there's racism against Black people, there's sexism against women, there's homophobia against gays and lesbians, there's transphobia against trans people. And if you're a Black woman, say, you experience both racism and sexism. And those are kind of more than the sum of their parts. And so you experience more oppression than a Black man does.
Mm-hmm.
That's at least one reading of intersectionality, is that, you know, a Black woman suffers more than a Black man on average. A Black trans woman suffers more than a Black cis woman, etc. All of these bigotries are additive.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you evaluate that idea as someone who is thinking about the problems uniquely facing boys?
Yeah, sure. And I think it is a good example of the need to avoid these zero-sum games that people on left and right keep trying to trick us into. Like, if we do more for boys and men, it necessarily means doing less for girls and women. So constant zero-sum game thinking, trench warfare, style culture war. And then you turn it to something like the particular position of Black boys and men. And I think that you see that very, very strongly. And I'll give a specific example of that, where there is now a commission on the social status of Black boys and men. It's passed with bipartisan legislation in 2016. It's a standing commission within the U.S. Office of Civil Rights to look specifically at Black boys and men. And it got through, but there was a lot of resistance from, particularly from Black women in the Democrat Congressional Caucus, because of a sense that why are we looking at boys and men? Something similar happened when Obama did My Brother's Keeper. Like there's this constant sense of like, this is going to distract from the deeper issues faced by Black women and girls. Again, zero sum. Again, it's like we can't do two things at once is the basic thought there. So that's an example of just how difficult this can get. But on the point of intersectionality, I think what I try to do, and I do this as a white British immigrant to America, so that's either a good or a bad thing, depending on your perspective, because it means that I am coming at it from a specific perspective. It's definitely not a lived experience, to use that phrase. But I think I'm taking Crenshaw at her word in a way that I don't think her followers, or indeed she herself, sometimes does, which is to say that what intersectionality means is that the relationships between different identities are not fixed, and they can overlap in complex and different ways. And so it's not as if it shouldn't be treated as additive. It shouldn't be male always above female, white always above black, etc. It will depend on the circumstances.
Right.
And then when you cut them across each other, things get really interesting. And so look at the race and gender now, and white women earn a lot more than black men. Okay. So which binary am I going to go with? Which binary, wait, what's going on there? Black men are half as likely as black women to go to college and get a college degree. The gender gap between black women and black men on almost every positive dimension is bigger than for other racial groups. And so actually what I think is that black men, and I argue
Can you
this
restate
in
that?
the
Because
book,
that's a really important point. That's a really important point.
which one? It's the top one.
That
Before you reinstate it, I put the link there. You want to come now? Because I'm going to soon wrap this up. For any comments or expression of what you see and heard on what was presented here on today's stream, even the topic. And do black women hinder black men progress? Fair use.
the gender gap between black men and black women on almost anything you can name or care about is much bigger than the gender gap between white men and white women.
What? Correct. Yeah, you've just said it better than me. So that's great. Yes. And that's true more generally, except where it's something where for the other groups, the men are so far ahead. So the wage gap is much narrower between black men and black women, but that's because black men only just out earn black women. And there are actually more black women in the labor force than black men. But on all the others, education, health, etc., the gap goes upward mobility. Black women, this is Raj Chetty's work now, black women are actually the most upwardly mobile out of the bottom quintile. Black men are the least upwardly mobile, with whites somewhere in between them. And so I think it's becoming a borderline irresponsible in some of these, in some cases, to use just the racial category to look at the experience, because you're then occluding these gigantic gender gaps within the black community, between black women and black men. So one more example, black women now, young black women are more likely to have a postgraduate degree than young white men. But black men, half as likely. So if you take intersectionality seriously, then you cannot presume just out of the gate, a priori, that black men are above black women. That becomes an empirical question. And I think the empirical answer is no, they're not. And that's before we get into issues of incarceration, criminal justice, suspension from school, and so on. And so black men are not disadvantaged despite being male, but in some cases because of being male. And that's, I think, applying intersectionality properly.
That is what intersectionality should be. If that's what Kimberly Crenshaw had said in her original paper, I think I would be an intersectionalist. I would want to look at the unique ways women suffer, women much more likely to suffer sexual violence, for example, and then look at the unique ways in which men are suffering. And that would be a really helpful conversation. What intersectionality is in practice, and I think in her words, is really this simple: women have it worse. Black women have it worse than black men. Black trans women have it worse than black women, because it all adds in this simplistic way.
No, it's all hogwash. It's all garbage. There's no suffering. You're in a country right now where you're as free as a bird, as a kite. You could screw anybody you want, suck and f everyone you want. This is as good as going to get, ladies. Yes, all that nonsense, writing peppers and all those books about intersexual nonsense. When I hear that crap, thing comes to my mind is because what are you worried about? What is your concern? You're not Miss Ann. The only person that more avoidance is people that are mostly majority of this country, which is white. And black people, especially black people, you're not white. So obviously you're going to be put at a certain caste system. Men have knew this long time and know they're going to get stifled with progression with other groups of men within outside this race. But it's more hurtful when you find your own woman trying to hinder the small little scrappers you need so you could potentially move further in progression. Very scary. Very scary. Fair use, fair use.
For example, I remember in Kimberly Crenshaw's TED Talk, she does this thing at the beginning of the talk where she asks people to, if they've heard of the names of certain black men killed by the police. Have you heard the names Michael Brown, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray, etc. And everyone raises their hands. And then she names a few, the names of 10 or so black women killed by the cops, and most people haven't heard of them. Very few people have heard of them. And she goes, "See, this is intersectionality. So you've heard of the oppression of black men, but you haven't heard of the oppression of black women." And it's like, oh, such a deep point. And then, my immediate reaction was like over 90% of the black people killed by the cops are men. So what she's doing, it's like naming a bunch of famous female rape victims that people may have heard of, and then naming a bunch of male rape victims that you haven't heard of, and then saying, well, isn't that funny that you haven't heard of? Well, no, it's the overwhelming cases of people getting sexually assaulted and raped is happening to women. That's why we know more cases. And so, it's obvious to me with an issue like racial profiling, for instance. I do not think that black women experience as much racism from the cops as black men do. I think black men specifically experience the majority of racial profiling and the cliche of crossing the street when you see a black man. The cliches of a black man for a reason, and that goes into, especially if you're a black man from the hood and you have the way of speaking and the way of dressing, that affects you in a job interview. It affects you more if you're a man from those areas, I think, in many cases at least, than if you're a woman. And that's a point very few people make.
Yeah, it's because of this. I think you had Roland Fryer on a little while back talking about some of that, some of those.
And the reason why it is very much not mentioned, and I'm gonna stop here because I already pushed it on the time limit that I should have been streaming. But let's keep real. It's because they're playing the victim queen, victim card. But behind closed doors, your other sister in higher positions are pushing and stopping the little programs and necessities and that could help young black men and that will become men to progress. You can't have both ways. You can't complain about this, that for you, this, that, and you're stopping the boys to become the men they are with the little necessary leverage of, wherever money or wherever programs need to help them further progress in the so-called lockdown quarantine society they have your men in. So, regardless, at the end of the day, in conclusion, to answer this question, do black women hinder black men progress? From the words of Richard Reeves and the confirmation about some of them that are in higher positions that kind of complain and shut down certain bills or anything put aside for black men, I will have to say confidently yes, unfortunately. Now, knowing this, what will you do now as a man? No matter what age you are, especially if you're in your 20s and up, what you're going to do as a man? Well, the only thing you could do now is you're going to depend and rely on other black men. Prefer the ones that are in the same, mindset will go further. But in regards to your woman, keep in mind she will look at you as an opposition. Most likely they're going to look at you as a competitor, and they will probably do everything possible to stop your progress. That's how I see it. And sad me to say, but the evidence in the pudding. So, be as a maid, you do whatever you want with this now revelation that you heard on today's stream. That's it for me, guys. I'm done. Hope you guys like the stream. Links to follow me are above. You can follow me on Twitter at Chaos27. Add me a friend on Facebook, Eric Ray on Facebook. Follow my Rumble page as well, CRain23 on Rumble. Join the Discord service of the Chaos Rain Show as well. And last but not least, become a member of the Chaos Rain Show as well. All membership guys perks. There's some videos now that's on members only. Check it out. But you have to become a member on one of the tiers. One of the tiers of the membership. But other than that, that's pretty much it for me. Leave your comments. Look for reading the comment section of this one. And please give a like on your way in, on your way out. And you always can support the channel while online, offline. Super chat still enabled. And the Cash App as well, If you want to find a Cash App, we go back and replay this. That's it for me, guys. I'm done. Thank you for watching. And you know what it is. Hold on. Let me do this. Yeah. All right. Until next time, guys, like always, let chaos ring.